In Tovshin Vov, before the decease of the Rebbe, when the Rebbe was in charge of giving out the Svarim, so the Rebbe gave out, printed, Torah Sholem. Torah Sholem is a collection of siches of the Rebbe Rashab. And some of these siches are built in Mugah. They were not edited by the Rebbe Rashab. The Rebbe gave it out as in the form of a sefer, but it wasn't print. It was stenciled. And it was bound like a sefer, but it was only stenciled. And in the Hakdameh, in the introduction, the Rebbe writes that some of these rishimes, these Hanochas, we can't figure out who wrote it. In other words, who was the meniach of the Hanocha, who made Hanocha. So you can't know how meduyik it is, how exact it is. But when you take in consideration that the people who wrote them were real Chassidim, that every word of their Rebbe was holy, so for sure that they tried to stick to the words of the Rebbe, not to add and not to subtract. And even though it's possible that because of the arichas of the Sikha, maybe there's a mistake in some words, especially when the Sikha is written in Lashon Kodesh, and the Sikha was said in Yiddish. So B'meila sometimes it's not exact muchaven when you copied it to change it to Lashon Kodesh to exact words, but b'chlolas the inyonim are definitely meduyik. So the same thing we could apply bepashtes to the Hanochas about the Rebbe's Farbrengen, that even though, like the Rebbe said, that there could be mistakes there, and the mistakes will go on the Rebbe's cheshbon, but b'chlolas it is meduyik. Like the Rebbe writes here, we could say the same thing b'negei the Hanochas of the Rebbe's Farbrengen. And we saw that in the beginning of the Lamed already, the Rebbe allowed built-in Mugah to be printed. For instance, in the year of Tovshin Lamed Hey, that year the Rebbe wasn't Magia, a likud for every week. The other years when he was Magia and that turned into the volumes of Likutei Sichos, that year the Rebbe wasn't Magia. But they had before that year, they had sent out every week thousands of copies of a Sicha that the Rebbe was Magia that week. Now that year, the Rebbe was Magia in his Sichos, so the Rebbe allowed to send out with the official cover of Likutei Sichos, Hanocha built-in Mugah, Sichos that the Rebbe was not Magia. So we see already the Rebbe allowed to be sent out to be Mafarsam Sichos which are built-in Mugah. Around the same time, a little bit before, in Tovshin Lamed Gimel, when Rabbi Shia Korf worked on giving out the second volume of his Likutei Biyurim on Tanya. He gave out years before a volume which is Biyurim on Tanya, but then he gave out a second volume, and the second volume was Kimat, the whole thing, Sichas of the Rebbe on Tanya. Most of it was Sichas of the Rebbe on Igeres HaTshuvah, because we know that Tovshin Chavtes that year, and before a little bit and after, the Rebbe spoke every Farbrengen on another piece of Igeres HaTshuvah, and the Rebbe was Magia, a lot of those Sichas, but many of the Sichas he was not Magia. And the people who worked on it together with him, helping him, was Shua Munshain, Olav HaSholem, and Yibod L'chaim, Rabbi Yosef Minkovich, and myself, preparing things to put into as part of the Sefer. So we wrote to the Rebbe, can we also print the built-in Mugah ones on the Igeres HaTshuvah? And the Rebbe agreed that we could print the built-in Mugah. So we see that he agreed. Also, when Likutei Sichos Chelik Vov came out, in the Sofer, there is at the end, the last piece is there, a Sicha built-in Mugah, which is an explanation to a Sicha in Parsha Shmeis, something that the Rebbe spoke in Parshas Vo'eira Tovshin Chavtes, in connection to the Likud that came out that year on the Rasha. So the Rebbe said something in connection to it, which was very important. So when they gave out, when it was printed in the volume of Chelik Vov, was asked the Rebbe, can we put in that Sicha and ask the Rebbe to be Magia? The Rebbe answered that he has no time, but printed the way it is. And he also gave a bracha that I think he wrote Schus Rab Misiyaitom, that the Eibusher will help it, you'll be Machabim to the Emes, but Lepeli allowed to print Hanocha built-in Mugah. And Take, in the beginning of the Mems, Take, Hanocha built-in Mugah was printed with a real print. And I don't know myself, probably the people who are involved know whether they asked the Rebbe if he could print it or not. I would assume probably they did, but even if they didn't, they gave it out and the Rebbe didn't object, obviously the Rebbe was maskim. And obviously the way it's afterwards, when they started giving out Teiros Menachem, they fixed many of the problems that the Rebbe had. The Rebbe wanted that the Psukim and the Mamor Chazal should be written as it says. That's what they do. The Rebbe wanted that there should be Mar Mekaymes, there are Mar Mekaymes there also. And they write it in a way that it should be understood and not to have any, in a way that what Rebbe said, you don't add anything, but in a way that there should be no problems with other places as much as you can. So that's why I assume the Rebbe was maskim that this should come out, and the Rebbe allowed it. And now, when you learn a Sicha that's even built in Mugah, you're learning the Rebbe's Torah, and you accomplish everything that you accomplish with learning the Rebbe's Torah.